Welcome to Health Law Talk, presented by Chehardy Sherman Williams. Health law broken down through expert discussion, real client issues, and real-life experiences. Breaking barriers to understanding complex healthcare issues is our job.
All right. So, Rory, I got to ask, what happens? Imagine that for a minute you're sitting there and you're a physician and you're looking at your contract, and in that contract there's a salary cap. And suddenly you're getting a call from DOJ or an investigator saying that, hey, by the way, we think that your salary cap is above fair market value and that, you know, you're in violation of a False Claim Act or an anti-kickback. What do you do?
Well, I think we have to go back to where did that number come from? Most of the time the providers are given a number by their employer, and then they'll go to their attorney or they'll do it themselves, but they'll try to negotiate that number. Most of the employment agreements that I see will have in there that caveat that, your compensation number is based on what we believe is fair market value, but there's always that provision in the employment agreement where it can be renegotiated up or down if the employer or hospital system decides that it's going too high. So I think the example you're talking about is that a number is agreed upon, but then after a period of time, there's some sort of audit, and they look at it and they say that you're being compensated too high, or we think that you're being essentially paid for referrals. Is that accurate?
That's extremely accurate. In fact, I think that actually happened on the North Shore. I mean, that was a North Shore. I don't know if you remember the North Shore Hospital. I think it's gone now.
Right.
But they, at some point in time, they were paying, and I remember this because I sat and I had several clients that were involved in that, where I found out that their compensation models from that hospital exceeded, right, even MGMA's FMV of over 100%. So they're getting paid like 110, 120%.
Right.
And I even questioned, I said, do y'all have FMV valuations from someone to verify that this comp is okay? Oh yeah, and guess what? They did, which was amazing to me. So, I knew this was on the radar, and in that case, that's an easy trigger because there was exceeding fair market value on the comp model. But the normal contracts that I see, right, same thing with you, have that clause in there that says the hospital, or usually the system of the employer, has the right to adjust compensation should they determine that it could, especially with productivity bonuses and focusing on RVU compensation, and you're getting beyond what they believe is fair market value, that they have the right to adjust it, which I think is a catch-22 because I mean nobody wants to work for free.
Right. You never want that number to go down.
No.
And I think so much of it, I think a lot of times when you'll see these audit letters come in where there's a question about the compensation of a physician is kind of like you said, what is in that physician's file that led to this compensation and what can justify it? So did the practice just look at MGMA data, which, for people that aren't familiar with that is, it's a national survey that's put out every year. A lot of hospital systems and our firms subscribe to that data, and it does a survey across the nation of what compensation looks like based on region, specialty, type of hospital, private, nonprofit, number of employees. It really gets very granular, and some of the data is very good because they have a lot of people respond to the survey, but for some, you don't have a lot of data. And then in certain cases, you've got a provider who has a specialty or a subspecialty, and they're highly trained and experienced. And so when you go look at that, what that provider is, so let's say it's an oncologist, and you look at what that MGMA data is, but then you say, okay, well, this physician is double board certified, he's got a subspecialty in this area, and he has innovated this new procedure that we believe warrants paying 120% of MGMA data. So do you have that information in that physician's file to back it up? Did you use a third-party valuation firm? We have a lot of colleagues that we work with for these like high-level physicians because their numbers are typically off the charts compared to MGMA data. So what do you have in that physician's file to back it up? Or is it something where it's just blatantly obvious on its face that this is we'll call it a for lack of a better expression, just a regular physician, but that physician is driving so many referrals that we have to find a way to compensate them, and we're going to try to hide it in their compensation for these referrals. I think those are two different scenarios that we can discuss and where the issues lie.
We'll walk back. I mean, let's start with the main question. What is fair market value? Like, what is that?
I think that's the most subjective term.
1,000-pound elephant in the room. Like, what is it?
That's the most subjective term in healthcare. I mean, you'll see that HHS, OIG, CMS, everyone has different definitions of what fair market value is.
Right.
But there is no real number. There is no one data set that says fair market value can be found at this website.
And see, that's the problem, because almost everything on the regulatory side in healthcare hinges on fair market
value.
Right. I mean, so it's having that conversation. I bet you if we stuck 3 valuation firms in this room and said, guys, independently, what's fair market value? Every single one would have a different response.
And they're probably not going to give you a number. They're probably going to give you a range, and they're going to have a little asterisk.
Or a methodology that might be, you're right, exactly.
And there's going to be an asterisk next to it that says, here's a range, but
subject to our revision, or we have reserve the right to change it, right?
And you have to consider all these other factors of this physician. What does this physician have? If you're doing and I think it goes back to the struggle of these large hospital systems and large employers. They don't want to do this for every physician.
No.
So if you've got a large hospital system that is hiring a group of, we'll say ER physicians straight out of residency, they want to look at MGMA data or have a valuation done for what they believe is the fair market value for those. But they don't want to do it for every time that they're hiring a physician, because that's just cost prohibitive. It gets very expensive. So they're using that same information for everyone. It's not specific to that doctor. And I think that they need to, for your high training physicians, there needs to be that specific evaluation done, but it's just not being done in a lot of cases.
Well, also, I mean, think about this. When it comes to fair market value in terms of a False Claims Act or some kind of like that kind of a suit, it's whatever the government says they want it to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you have a DOJ attorney telling you, well, here's what we believe FMV is, and that's it. That's
what we think it is.
Right. This is the goal. So if they have a number, and I mean everybody's numbers all over the place, it's a hard target to hit.
And then you, as the employer, have to try to find a way to justify or back into that number. Where did you come up with this number? Is it because this doctor is double board certified and has an innovative technique, or does this doctor drive 90% of referrals to that practice section in your hospital? And how can you really justify that number? And another thing is, are you justifying it now, or do you have some sort of record where you justified it before you hired them?
Well, here's another problem, though. Okay, so imagine you have a high-valued physician, right, going into an employer to start some, contracting, a simple contract scenario, right? And in that contract, they have the language that we reserve the right to adjust compensation based on fair market value. Well, shouldn't the doctor have the right to challenge that? I mean, shouldn't a physician have the right to say, okay, show me the valuation? You're telling me that I'm exceeding fair market value based on your subjective determination. I want some objective values of why that is, and I have a right to challenge that.
And from that,
and they'll never let that happen. I have tried that so many times, and they will not let me do it.
And I have never seen it go up. It always will go down. They'll say that according to our analysis, your fair market value has gone down.
So if I'm the doctor, do I want to be working for free?
Absolutely not.
So what do you do? If you've exceeded your targeted, let's just say, and for those listening, when we're talking about this, we're talking about a targeted RVU.
Right.
And you exceed the targeted RVU by X numbers, and then suddenly you're being told, say, for example, your target's a 5,000 RVU, and you exceed it by 2,000. So you're at 2,000 extra. And you're being told that, okay, based on our dollar per RVU times the 2,000 extra, you're exceeding the fair market value, and say it's like September.
What do you do for the next 3 months?
What do you do next for the next 3 months?
Right.
Do you just say, okay, I'm going to go in and just watch TV? Because essentially that's what you should do.
Yeah, because they're not going to want to pay you over that fair market value.
Right. I mean, you literally would be working for free. I just can't wrap my head around that.
No, it's a problem, like you said, for the physicians that are on that higher spectrum of knowledge and expertise, and then for the ones that are very productive. Now, what if we flip the scenario where you want to bring in a physician and you know that their fair market value is, let's say, $300,000, but they're a surgeon and they're going to refer a ton of lab and imaging work to your center.
Right.
So
do you give them a pass?
And can you? I know the answer to this, but can you build into their salary the thought process of, well, yeah, his billed services are really only worth $300,000. But he's going to send every patient for lab work and every patient for imaging and every patient for follow-up. That doctor, on the doctor's side, that doctor is going to want to be compensated for that. He knows how much value in a dollar sense he's bringing to that hospital or that surgery.
I'm sure the hospital's going to want to compensate him for that, but the problem is how do you do it legally? And how do you do it within your regulatory compliance, right? That's the hard.
It's very hard to do. But the doctor may say, "Well, I'm not coming to your hospital because
they have every right to do that
because I know that I'm going to bill X amount of dollars for services, but I'm also going to drive so much more business to your practice." So what do you do in that case?
I don't know. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, so let me ask you this. I'm gonna sort of pivot there. Most of the time when we argue, comp for physician contracts, we're talking about, using MGMA benchmarks, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, what we're talking about right here at 120% or high level, or your lab example, for example, what you just stated, I mean, that's sort of the outlier. I mean, that is almost the exception to the rule, right? And I think the answer is to your question is that there's nothing you can do. You have to work in the confines of trying to keep within fair market value. And if that doctor has to walk, guess what? They walk.
Right.
I mean, otherwise you're just opening yourself up to problems. So,
but you don't want them to walk because you're losing all those ancillaries.
That's right. You're losing revenue from all that. So, the only other way to do it, I mean, frankly, is you're talking about medical director agreements. You're talking about maybe some sort of administrative role where you can compensate them for the administrative part separately and try to work in something like that. If you have if you're a private hospital, you have more options because you can put them in if you have a REIT, for example, you can put them in the REIT. For those of you in real estate investment trust, so you have that option. But wait, I want to get back to the normal, everyday, even specialist contract that we're looking at. Most times, comps are falling at 50% or less,
right,
from MGMA. And the question I have is does MGMA itself, is that a reputable FMV? I mean, I use it.
I use it as well.
I use it as well. So
it's the only, not the only source, but it's the main source that we can rely on because it's a demonstrative. It's on paper. Now it's online only, but it's a demonstrative way for you to say, here's where these numbers came from. And then everything else after that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But you brought up a good point about the medical directorships.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's another way to thread the needle.
But the government knows about those. And so they know that, for my example of the surgeon who's going to refer a ton of lab work and imaging work, are you just going to go ahead and pay him what you can justify as fair market value and then give him some sort of fake medical directorship where you're getting him another pot of money? I think the government's very aware of those situations, and they'll look at those as well. I think that's why it's really important for these medical directorship rules that you can actually justify your duties. And a lot of times I'll see in these medical directorship agreements, there'll be in there an attachment where the doctor has to state the date and the time and how long he spent and what he did actually being that medical director. Because just giving someone the title of medical director and here's another $200,000, I don't think that passes the smell test for the government.
That's a lot of money for a medical director. I mean,
but I've seen it before.
Rare cases. I mean, I had that key tam that had that problem, and I was amazed at that. I'll be candid with you. I was amazed the government passed that up. We had that in my key tam. That whistleblower action, and I had medical director agreements. To your point, 200,000 plus, and it was always the highest referral.
Yeah.
I brought that up to DOJ, and you would have thought that it was like please pass the salt. They didn't care. I couldn't believe it. But from our standpoint, I mean, when we're drafting that and we're advising clients, I 100% agree with you. It has to be fair market value, in line, and the administrative duties have to be met, be recorded. Otherwise, you're running into problems.
Yeah, and we have data. We have MGMA data on medical directorships.
I saw that
and
recently.
what those
$25,000, $30,000 a year kind of things. They're not too. That's supposed to be 200,000.
Right. But you and I have both seen those really high ones, and so that's an issue.
I'm just amazed people would even think that that's normal.
Now, what is the physician's perspective if they're involved in, like you said, a false claims act, or there's a case brought against the physician saying that they're being paid above fair market value, and the doctor says, well, wait a second, guys, I went there and interviewed, and this is the number they gave me, and I said okay to it, and I had all my cases and my labs and my imaging there, but I didn't come up with this number. Is there any defense for the doctor if he had no part in it? Meaning if the doctor just took the number that was given to him.
I mean, that's a great defense. Put my hands in my pocket and say, nope, wasn't me. They told me, I said I liked it, and that's it. Sign here.
I don't think it absolves the doctor. Right. No. I don't think it absolves the doctor, because the government is going to say you knew that this was excessive compensation driven to you for you to drive referrals.
Well, I guess then we'll go back to your point about the administrative duties. How much work would you have to put in to objectively state that a $200,000 medical director fee was legitimate? You follow me?
Yeah.
So if you've got a full-time practice and you're like a 1.0 FTE and you're doing a full practice, clinical, whatever it is you're doing, and you're getting paid another 200 or six-figure, right, of a medical director, you better be damn sure that your calendar entries show significant amount of time administratively, or you're going to be in real trouble.
Absolutely.
Because that's the funny thing. I think doctors don't realize this, but it's not just them going to DOJ and saying, they gave it to me. I didn't realize. I just signed on the dot. What the DOJ, really not the DOJ, it's the FBI. The FBI is going to come into that office, Rory. They're going to get the emails, the calendars, the written calendars, the appointment books. They're going to go through and look at the daily everything of that physician. If they're targeting a clinic or their doctor, I mean, it's not simply just, hey, we got a complaint here.
Right.
I mean, it is a massive investment. They're going to come in and take everything, and they're going to take the appointment book and match it with the Outlook calendar on the system. They're going to look at the time you spent and meeting minutes to see how long you actually were sitting in the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the scenario, and I have seen this before and I've read about this from the publications that the DOJ will put out on their investigations for these.
That's right.
One was recent where the medical directorship was adjusted in line, and this hospital got hit for this. The medical directorship and the compensation was adjusted in line annually based on that physician's referral patterns, and that was a
real deal.
That was a very clear. I'll have to share it with you. That was a very clear case where this system would look at the doctor's referrals, and then in 1 year where his referrals weren't what he probably said he was going to bring, they adjusted his comp down.
Can I ask the question? Who's advising these hospitals?
I think that they're looking at it from a business decision of this makes sense from a business.
Do they not contact counsel? I mean, do they not? Again, this is the cut your nose off to spite your face. I don't want to pay for it, right? And then suddenly they run afoul because you got a CEO who's doing this.
Right.
That just blows my mind.
And in every other industry, it makes perfect sense. If you're not bringing business, then we're going to adjust your compensation. But
not in healthcare.
Not in healthcare.
I mean, that just gee whiz. So let's circle back. So the gist of this, the whole thing is fair market value, right? How do you figure that out? What do you do if you're a physician and you get a contract with that cap language? And I guess where do we go from here? How does it work?
Well, I think that every physician that's negotiating their employment agreement and they're presented with an offer that the employer is stating, here's your base compensation, here's your salary, and we believe this is fair market value. I think that provider should always ask, can you show me where these numbers came from? Like, do you have something? And the hospital system say, well, yes, we checked 2023. Now it's rolling on 2024 data that's about to come out. We checked 2023 MGMA data, and our system pays in this range, and you fall in this range, and that's where the number came from. I think that should be step one for a physician to find out, from their perspective, are they comfortable with it? Are they comfortable with what is being told to them as fair market value? I think on the hospital side, they should be documenting this. They should have in there, or the employer side, they should have in there their records showing, okay, this is what we offer for this type of physician, and here's where we came to that justification. And if we're bringing in this excellent, the example I keep using, the double board certified surgeon who has this new technique that we're bringing him in, we believe he's worth this. They need to go out and get a separate valuation for that physician to justify that. I think that's the steps that you need to take on, depending on what side you're on.
I also think too that there needs to be a mechanism for a doctor to challenge a system's determination that they're capped. There's got to be a way because otherwise, I had the issue of an ortho back spine client of mine, literally being told that he was capped. It was like August. Mm-hmm. And he had already. He was like a workhorse.
Sure.
And he was told, oh well, we can't pay you anymore because you're capped.
Right.
And that's just the way it's going to be. So he would literally go into the office and go watch like movies.
Right.
And I'm like, this is just
right.
the most inefficient.
Right.
Like so you have a guy who's clearly got qualifications, who is going in watching movies,
and then next year,
because they're not going to they're not going to pay him.
And then next year, for that same physician you just described, are they going to now adjust his RVUs down so that he now works 12 months but makes the same amount? Because if I'm the hospital, that's what I'm probably going to think. I'm going to think, well, let's just pay him less. We know he's going to work this amount.
Let me just tell you, then he's going to walk the exit door.
He's absolutely going to leave.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100% going to leave.
So here's a hypothetical that we could kind of wrap this up on. But why do you think HHS OIG doesn't put out or have a comparable, or say, we base our numbers off of MGMA, or we're going to put together our own survey, and here is fair market value. It's going to be updated annually, and this is justifiable fair market value. If you have outliers, be sure that you're able to justify it. Why do you think they've never, in the decades that this has been around, they have never done their own? Because this is the hardest question to answer: is what is fair market value?
I think with the myriad of healthcare contracts and businesses and all of the interactions going on, I don't think it's possible to cover all the bases. And of course, it's a moving target, because valuation continues to move on a yearly basis. I don't think
Right.
it's set 1 year and then you wait 3 years. But I do think CMS has come out recently with a clarified definition of just fair market value of itself. So, I think they're trying to narrow it down so that this nebulous, vague idea of what fair market value, could be construed as is sort of narrowed in a sense, but it's not there yet.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll ever get there. Maybe
they don't
put the valuation firms out of business.
And look, maybe right, and maybe this is a horrible way to think about it, but maybe they don't want to say what fair market value is, because then it's going to take away a lot of their power to go after these. If they say what it is, then are they going to have less cases to go after?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. I don't know. But you know what though? The way I look at it, that's great. It's got its good and bad points. Good for valuation firms.
Very good.
Very good
Right.
for them. Hard for clients and doctors to wrap their heads around, because this is such a nebulous term with no concrete, truly objective thing. And even if we use MGMA, for example,
Right.
I think you're safe, if you're in the bell curve, right?
Right.
But when you start pushing the bell curve, and that only happens in the most rare situations, I think, because most systems want to lower the expectations
Sure.
on the base and move the needles so that so they always win and make money. But on the rare occasions, you've got the unique doctor with the labs, for example, or the expertise, or the entrepreneurial, the guy, the gold standard, or whatever. You run real close to running across the line if you push it to the 90th, 95th, 100 percentile, even in MGMA.
I agree.
You know. So that's, well, look, let me tell you this. I like this discussion. I like the fair market value discussion. But I want to tell you this. I am putting together a special fraud program so that you and I are going to talk about that. So we're going to talk about fraud and examining how billions are lost in fraud schemes in healthcare. So that's going to come up next time. So be on the lookout for that.
All right.
I'll lay it out for you. And we can tell the audience about the billions and billions of dollars lost in healthcare every year, what DOJ is going to be doing, sort of a forecast of 2025, and sort of our little note to clients as to, hey, be on the lookout for these schemes, and here's how to protect yourself.
All right. Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a great weekend. Enjoy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Health Law Talk, presented by Chehardy Sherman Williams. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel, make sure to give us that 5-star rating, and share with your friends. Chehardy Sherman Williams is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does this podcast establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not count as an endorsement or recommendation by Chehardy Sherman Williams. The views expressed by guests on the show are their own, and their appearance does not imply an endorsement of them or their entity that they represent. Remember, please consult an attorney for your specific legal issues.